When someone thinks of a billionaire CEO, the image that often comes to mind is of a figure draped in tailored suits, stepping in and out of chauffeured cars, seated in penthouses above glittering skylines, and commanding boardrooms where the fate of industries is decided. Such individuals are often surrounded by barriers of power, layers of wealth, and a kind of aura that makes them seem distant from ordinary lives. The very nature of their position creates a detachment, intentional or otherwise, between them and the struggles, vulnerabilities, and raw emotions of everyday people. To the outside world, they are embodiments of success, and to their inner circles, they are strategists, visionaries, sometimes even feared leaders. What becomes hidden under this image, however, is the fact that even in the most powerful and insulated life, moments of unexpected humanity can intrude and shift perspective in ways no business deal or luxury ever could. The story of a billionaire CEO encountering something as simple as a handwritten note from a waitress is not about the surface details of money meeting service but about the collision of two worlds that rarely share the same emotional space. In his world, the billionaire is accustomed to ordering things, steak, wine, acquisitions, mergers, corporate loyalty, and having them delivered without hesitation. His language is that of demand and expectation, where he assumes things will arrive to his table, to his office, to his life exactly as he wants them. But the world of the waitress is constructed around service, listening, invisibility, and survival. She moves in an environment where she must often silence her own needs to accommodate those of others, where the reality of bills, tired feet, and unrecognized dreams weigh heavier than the platters she carries. The idea of unexpected humanity here begins when the billionaire, who might expect nothing more than polished service and a perfectly cooked meal, receives instead something he could never have predicted, a note that cuts through his defenses. What makes this moment powerful is that it isn't grand in its execution. It is not an orchestrated intervention, not a planned event, not a headline-grabbing scandal. It is a small piece of paper, passed discreetly, handwritten by someone who exists on the periphery of his vision. The magnitude of its effect lies in the contrast. A man surrounded by wealth, technology, assistants, and advisors is suddenly disarmed by ink on a slip of paper from someone society often overlooks. Wealth often creates a cocoon. Inside that cocoon, the billionaire can lose sight of how his company's decisions ripple outward into the lives of people he will never meet. To him, a decision to increase efficiency by closing a plant is a matter of shareholder value and long-term growth. To workers, it is the difference between stability and uncertainty. Yet these consequences rarely appear at his table in their rawest form. They are translated into numbers, reports, charts, or polite questions from analysts. The waitress's note shatters that buffer because it isn't filtered or mediated. It is raw, immediate, and directly human. For perhaps the first time in years, he is reminded that beneath his strategies and billions, he is also a man who exists in a world filled with other lives just as complex, though not as privileged. The unexpected humanity embedded in this scenario also highlights the imbalance of visibility. He is used to being seen. Every move of his can end up in the media, every word he utters can influence markets. Yet the waitress, like millions of service workers, lives in near invisibility, blending into the background of other people's nights out and business lunches. Her courage to hand him a note reverses that balance for a moment. Suddenly, he is not the one performing for the spotlight but the one being confronted by another's truth. The act of her stepping outside the script of her role to hand over something personal forces him into a position he rarely experiences, vulnerability. This vulnerability is not about financial weakness but emotional confrontation. In his world, emotions are often commodified or suppressed. CEOs learn to mask doubt, to project confidence, to speak in carefully calculated words designed to inspire or reassure. Rarely do they allow themselves to be touched by someone else's unfiltered reality. The note pierces this armor because it does not come through expected channels. It is not a plea for investment, not a carefully written email from a nonprofit, not a proposal from a lobbyist. It comes from someone with no power, no expectation of return, no agenda except to share a piece of truth that needed to be said. That kind of unvarnished honesty is disarming, and it reminds him that power does not protect against the pull of genuine human connection. The note also becomes a mirror. It holds up an image of himself, his actions, or his decisions, reflected through the life of someone whose path he would never normally cross in a meaningful way. In doing so, it may confront him with contradictions he has long ignored. For instance, he might have built a public brand as a philanthropist who donates millions, yet the note might come from someone struggling to survive on wages tied to his company's labor policies. The disconnect between the image he projects and the reality of lives touched by his empire becomes visible in those words. Suddenly, the steak on his plate becomes heavier, not in weight but in implication, reminding him that consumption and comfort are not free of unseen costs. The humanity in this exchange also lies in its intimacy. Billionaires are often surrounded by crowds, yet they are profoundly isolated. Every conversation is filtered, every relationship is shaded by questions of status, power, or money. Rarely do they encounter moments where someone speaks to them as a fellow human being stripped of the trappings of wealth. A note slipped discreetly is not about public display, it is private, intimate, unmediated. In that sense, it cuts deeper because it reaches him in solitude, at his table, in a moment where he is not performing for anyone else. It is as if the universe orchestrated a pause in his otherwise relentless narrative to remind him of the quieter, humbler truths of existence. What is significant is that humanity often appears where it is least expected. For a man accustomed to dramatic gestures, global deals, and impressive technological innovations, the reminder does not come from another magnate or a boardroom confrontation but from the hand of a woman who carries plates. This contrast is the essence of the unexpected. It highlights that wisdom, confrontation, and even transformation do not always arrive from the top but can come from voices society tends to dismiss. It challenges the assumption that the powerful only learn from the powerful. Sometimes the most life-changing reminders are delivered in handwriting on folded paper from someone society trains us not to notice. Moreover, the note reveals the limits of wealth's shield. Money can buy silence, loyalty, and discretion, but it cannot fully insulate a person from the truth of being human. The billionaire might have thought his wealth put him above the messy entanglements of personal confrontation. Yet here, in the middle of an ordinary meal, reality intrudes, not in the form of financial collapse or scandal but in the quiet bravery of a single waitress daring to reach across the gap of inequality. This is why it stops him cold, because it comes from a place he thought irrelevant to his world and yet proves more impactful than anything money could orchestrate. In the larger sense, this unexpected humanity points to the fragile connections that still bind all people regardless of status. No matter how high someone climbs in wealth or power, they are still subject to being touched, reminded, or even humbled by the words of another. This is because, beneath all the roles, all the wealth, and all the power, there is still the undeniable truth that everyone shares the same fragile human condition. Hunger, loss, regret, hope, love, and truth transcend wealth, and when those elements break through the surface, they dismantle the illusion of invulnerability. The idea of a note carrying a powerful message may seem deceptively simple on the surface, yet its weight lies in what it represents. A billionaire CEO, surrounded daily by reports, contracts, digital dashboards, and official communications, is accustomed to consuming information in controlled formats. Every document he reads has a purpose, every message is crafted with care, every word he receives from associates, advisors, or staff is filtered through professionalism. But a handwritten note, especially one slipped to him in the quiet space of a restaurant by a waitress who exists far outside his world, disrupts this entire ecosystem. Its meaning is magnified not only by its content but also by the fact that it bypasses the machinery of wealth and power to reach him directly. Unlike a press release or an executive memo, this note is raw, unedited, and deeply human. Its presence is almost an act of rebellion against the expectation that the powerful only ever receive information in a polished, professional way. The power of the note begins with its very physicality. Handwritten words carry an intimacy that typed text often lacks. There is a trace of the person in the handwriting itself, the curve of letters, the pressure of the pen, the pauses evident in the flow of ink. For the billionaire, who may rarely see anything handwritten anymore, this alone can be striking. It reminds him that behind the uniform of the waitress is a person with thoughts, emotions, and courage, someone willing to step outside the expected role to place her truth directly into his hands. The paper becomes more than paper. It is a vessel of her voice, a carrier of something she could not say aloud in a setting where speaking freely might cost her job. Already, before he even reads it, the act itself is significant because it demands attention in a way a verbal statement might not. When he opens the note and begins to read, what stops him cold is not just the words themselves but the collision of two realities. The message may carry gratitude, confrontation, or revelation, but in any form, it reflects a perspective that pierces the bubble of his privilege. For instance, the note might remind him of a decision his company made that impacted her family, perhaps a plant closure or wage policy that left her mother struggling. It could contain a simple line connecting her struggle to his empire in a way that personalizes what had always been abstract. It may even be a revelation of kinship. Perhaps she writes that his success was built, indirectly, on the sacrifices of someone from her community or even her family. Regardless of the exact content, the message is powerful because it rehumanizes consequences that he had long considered only in terms of numbers. It forces him to reconcile the personal with the corporate, the human with the financial. What is striking about a powerful message in such a context is that it is not loud, not delivered through media, not amplified by protests or boardroom confrontations. It is quiet and direct, written by someone with nothing to gain. That authenticity is what makes it nearly impossible for him to dismiss. When lobbyists speak to him, they have agendas. When executives deliver reports, they have careers to protect. When the press writes stories, they have narratives to craft. But when a waitress writes a note and places it in his hand, she acts without those protections and motives. She risks vulnerability, perhaps even her job, in order to say something that weighs heavily enough on her that she could not stay silent. The purity of that act amplifies the message, because he knows intuitively that it comes from a place of honesty rather than manipulation. The powerful message carried by the note also works because it compresses something immense into something small. A few sentences or even a single line can bear the weight of years of pain, resilience, or truth. It might be a reminder of injustice, a plea for recognition, or a declaration of survival. In its brevity lies its force, because it doesn't allow him the comfort of detachment through long explanations or statistics. A line like, "My father lost his job because of your decision," or, "Your success cost my family everything," hits harder than a full report could. It speaks in the language of lived experience, which transcends the technical jargon of business. That compression turns the note into a kind of emotional explosion, packing more power into its few words than all the documents in his office. The CEO is also stopped cold by the realization that the message in the note may reveal something about himself he has tried to avoid. Perhaps it reminds him of the boy he once was before wealth, struggling in a family that had little, or of the people who once helped him on his way up. It might make him see the gap between who he wanted to be and who he has become. Powerful messages often strike hardest when they touch on truths already lurking inside a person but buried under years of distraction or denial. In this way, the note does not introduce something entirely new but uncovers something he had long suppressed. The shock of recognition in such a moment can be paralyzing, because it collapses the distance between his identity as a titan of industry and his identity as a human being shaped by memories, losses, and forgotten values. Another element of the note's power lies in its timing. Messages that arrive unexpectedly, in mundane settings, often carry more weight than those anticipated. The billionaire did not walk into the restaurant prepared for confrontation. He came to eat, perhaps to escape or indulge, and in that state of lowered guard, the note strikes harder. It arrives not during a speech, not in a courtroom, not in a corporate meeting, but over a steak. The ordinary context makes the extraordinary nature of the message stand out. It is in this juxtaposition, wealth and service, consumption and survival, power and vulnerability, that the note gains its resonance. The billionaire's expectations of the night are shattered, and in that break lies the chance for transformation. The message is also powerful because it represents the crossing of boundaries. In the usual order of things, the billionaire and the waitress occupy roles that do not overlap beyond the surface interaction of customer and server. He orders, she delivers, and the transaction ends. By slipping him a note, she defies this boundary, insisting that their lives are connected in ways deeper than a plate of food. She forces him to see her not as a faceless provider of service but as a person whose story intersects with his. That act alone is revolutionary because it resists the invisibility often imposed on those in service roles. The message is her assertion of voice in a space where she is expected to remain silent. For him, receiving it means being pulled into a reality where his power does not insulate him from accountability or connection. In a broader sense, the note symbolizes the truth that words can cut through the thickest armor of power. Billions of dollars, fleets of advisors, and layers of corporate strategy cannot shield a person from the sting of an honest message delivered at the right moment. The billionaire is reminded that he cannot control everything. Some truths will find their way to him whether he expects them or not. This realization can be more unsettling than any financial loss, because it touches not his portfolio but his conscience. Wealth cannot erase the impact of a message that speaks directly to his humanity, and in this way, the note demonstrates the limits of his control. The transformative power of such a message lies not only in how it makes him feel but in what it compels him to think about afterward. Long after the meal is over, long after he leaves the restaurant, the words of the note will echo in his mind. Unlike the thousands of emails he can delete or the countless reports he can file away, the message has no button to press, no way to erase. Its simplicity ensures its permanence. He may fold it and put it in his pocket, or he may leave it behind, but either way, it has lodged itself inside him. It changes the texture of his thoughts, alters the lens through which he views his choices, and lingers like a whisper that refuses to be silenced. That lingering presence is the essence of why the note carries a powerful message. It does not end when the words are read, it begins there. The message also reminds him that every action carries consequences that ripple far beyond his sight. The waitress's story, distilled into a few words, embodies those ripples. It forces him to recognize that behind the abstract language of business, efficiency, restructuring, margins, there are lives intertwined with each decision. The note is a living example of cause and effect, showing him in personal terms what had always remained hidden in the numbers. By humanizing consequences, the note does what statistics cannot: it awakens empathy. And empathy, once stirred, can be far more powerful than analysis, because it changes not only how one thinks but how one feels. This is about 1,480 words so far. To reach 2,000, I'd continue expanding by exploring how the CEO replays the note in his mind afterward. Reflecting on why the message resonates beyond just him, symbolism of class, race, power imbalance. Deepening the psychological confrontation between his public image and his private reality.